Let me tell you something that still keeps me up at night. Not because it was terrifying, not because I almost died, though that part did happen more than once. No, it keeps me up because even now, years later, I still can't explain exactly how it started. One second I was doing my job. The next second, I had accidentally challenged the most dangerous being in the known galaxy to a duel I had absolutely no business accepting. And somehow, that was the beginning of the strangest love story the Galactic Compact has ever recorded. My name is Sergeant First Class Eli Vance, Terran Defense Corps, 3rd Battalion, Outer Rim Diplomatic Station Verakor 7. I was 29 years old when it happened. I had been stationed on Verakor 7 for 8 months by then. Long enough to know the rhythms of the place. Long enough to stop flinching every time a Drakali warship docked in Bay 11. Long enough to recognize the difference between a visiting dignitary having a bad day and an actual security situation. I thought I knew everything I needed to know about that station. I was wrong. Verakor 7 sat at the edge of the Paloran Nebula, which sounds poetic until you actually live there. In reality, the nebula meant the station was bathed in a constant low-level electromagnetic interference that made half our communication arrays operate at about 60% capacity. It meant the external sensors threw false positives 3 or 4 times a week. It meant that every morning when you walked to your post, the sky, what passed for sky through the station's observation panels, was this deep bruised violet color, shot through with slow-moving ribbons of pale green light. Honestly, it was beautiful. In the way that a storm over an ocean is beautiful, you appreciate it while also being very aware that it could kill you. The station itself was enormous. 6 residential rings, 47 docking bays, a central diplomatic hub the size of a small city, and deep underneath it all, in the parts they didn't put on the official tour, 17 containment levels that I personally had never visited and had no particular desire to visit. Verakor 7 was a crossroads station, the kind of place where every major spacefaring civilization passed through at some point. Humans, yes, but also Drakali, Myurksai, Ihoran, Sulne, and about 30 other species I couldn't always identify on sight. And then there were the Nokthari. If you don't know what a Nokthari is, consider yourself fortunate. They are, and I am being completely factual here, not dramatic, the oldest civilization in the Galactic Compact. Their written history stretches back over 90,000 years, which makes humanity look like we showed up approximately 5 minutes ago. They come from a tidally locked world called Evith, which means one side of their planet faces their sun forever and the other side never sees light. The Nokthari evolved on the dark side. They are built for it. Their eyes are large and gold-pupiled and can see in conditions that would register as total blackness to human sensors. Their skin tones range from deep ash gray to something almost blue-black, with a kind of faint bioluminescent quality that you only notice in very dark rooms. They are fast. I mean fast, in a way that doesn't seem physically possible until you see it. And then you feel your brain try to quietly shut down rather than process what just happened. And they drink blood. Not because they're monsters, not because there's anything dramatic or theatrical about it. It's just their physiology. Their digestive system requires specific hemoglobin compounds that their bodies can't synthesize independently. They eat regular food like everyone else, but they also require periodic consumption of compatible blood or synthesized hemoglobin substitute to maintain cellular function. Most Nokthari in compact space use the synthetic version. It tastes, by all accounts, like absolutely nothing, but it does the job. The point is, and I want you to understand this before we go any further, the Nokthari were not something you approached casually. They were not something you engaged with lightly. There was an entire section in our posting briefing, 14 pages long, specifically about Nokthari diplomatic protocol. 14 pages. The Ihoran briefing was 2 pages. The Drakali briefing, who everyone considered the most dangerous species in the compact, was 9 pages. 14 pages for the Nocthari. I had read every single page, twice. And it still wasn't enough. The day it happened started like every other day on Verakor 7, which means it started with me being tired, slightly under-caffeinated, and standing at Gate 7 of the Central Diplomatic Hub at 600 station time, watching the morning arrival shuttles queue up in Bay 9 through the observation window to my left. My partner that morning was Corporal Disayuan, who had been stationed on Verakor 7 for 3 years, and therefore thought of herself as an old hand at this, which mostly expressed itself as an ability to look professionally alert while actually being 90% asleep. She was good at her job, precise, calm, and had an instinct for trouble that I respected enormously. The central hub gate we were assigned to was the priority access corridor, the one used by diplomatic personnel and high-clearance visitors who didn't go through the main arrival processing. It was generally considered the quieter posting. Less foot traffic, better controlled, fewer incidents. I want to be very clear that I was tricked by how quiet it seemed that morning. The first 6 arrivals through priority access were routine. A Ihoran trade delegation, 2 Solnay researchers, a compact administrative official whose name I didn't catch, a Myerx ambassador I'd seen come through 3 times before who nodded at me like we were old acquaintances, which we were not, but I appreciated the gesture. Then the 7th arrival came through. I felt her before I saw her. That sounds strange, I know, but there's something that happens to the air in a room when a Nocthari walks in, this subtle drop in ambient temperature that isn't quite explainable by anything in our thermal sensors, but that every human being on Verakor 7 feels in their bones like a cold hand settling against the back of their neck. Not painful, not threatening, just present, like the room suddenly became aware of itself. She came through the gate at a pace that was measured and unhurried, and somehow covered the distance from the door to my checkpoint in less time than it had any right to. She was tall, most Nocthari are, by human standards, with the gray-blue skin tone that indicated she was from the northern hemisphere of Evith. Her hair was the color of deep space, almost black but with that faint bioluminescent thread running through it that I mentioned, and it was pulled back in a way that was simultaneously formal and practical. Her uniform, and it was a uniform, though nothing like any compact-affiliated military I recognized, was deep charcoal with silver detailing along the collar and cuffs that caught the light in a way that made it look like it was moving. Her eyes, when she looked at me, were the gold I'd read about, except the briefing had called them gold, and that wasn't quite right. Gold is a warm color. Her eyes were gold the way the Paloran Nebula outside was gold, distant, ancient, containing something you couldn't name. She handed me her credentials without speaking, which was normal for Nocthari. The briefing had been very clear on this. Nocthari consider unsolicited verbal interaction from strangers to be mildly rude, borderline presumptuous. You process their documents, you clear them through, you do not make small talk. I took the credentials, I ran them through the scanner. And that's when the mistake happened. The scanner made a sound it had never made before. Not the standard clear green confirmation tone, and not the red alert tone that meant hold this person and call for backup. It made a sort of uncertain tone, a tone that I had genuinely never heard before in 8 months of operating this exact scanner. A tone that I later found out was the system's way of saying this credential type exists in our database, but this specific authorization level exceeds this terminal's clearance to process, and you should escalate immediately. The problem was that the tone was ambiguous enough that my brain, in the split second I had to interpret it, filed it under possible error rescan required. So I rescanned. The scanner made the uncertain tone again. And then, because I was sleep-deprived and operating on autopilot, and because this had never, in 8 months, been an issue, I looked up at her and said, I'm going to need you to step to the side, please. There's something in the system that needs to be manually reviewed. There was a pause. The kind of pause that has texture. The kind of pause that you could feel against your skin. She looked at me. I want to be very precise about this. She looked at me the way you might look at a domesticated animal that had just, for the first time, shown signs of understanding something. Not unkind, not angry, just curious in a way that was absolutely bone-deep unsettling. "Step to the side," she said. Her voice was low and controlled, and had that particular Nocthari quality of sounding like it was coming from slightly further away than the person speaking actually was. "You are asking me to step to the side. Protocol requires manual review when." "Do you know what I am?" she said. And here is where I made the second mistake, which was much worse than the first. I said, "I do. That's why I'm being thorough." Dissa, who was standing 2 meters to my left, made a sound that I can only describe as a very small, very controlled intake of breath that contained within it approximately 17 levels of alarm. The Nocthari woman looked at me for another long moment. Then she did something I did not expect. The corner of her mouth moved. Barely. The tiniest displacement of expression that, on a Nocthari face, I would later learn constituted the equivalent of a human raising their eyebrows and saying, "Well, this is interesting." "Thorough," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am." "You find my clearance insufficient." "I find the terminal's ability to verify your clearance level potentially insufficient," I said, "which is a different thing, and I apologize for the inconvenience." Another pause, shorter this time. "Your name," she said. "Sergeant First Class Eli Vance, Terran Defense Corps." "Vance," she said, as if cataloging it. "You are very small, Sergeant Vance." I had been called small by Nocthari before. It wasn't an insult exactly. It was more of a species-neutral observation, the way you might note that something was a particular temperature. But something about the way she said it, with that barely there expression, made it feel like something else entirely. "I've heard that," I said. "And yet you stopped me." "I did my job." She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her uniform slowly, which I appreciated, because a Nocthari moving fast at close range is not something you ever fully process in real time, and produced a secondary credential that she handed to me. This one was not a standard compact document. It was a physical object, a small dark card, with Nocthari glyphs embossed on it in a silver that seemed to shift as I held it. I didn't know what it was. I knew enough to know that I didn't know, which meant I needed to call it in rather than guess. "One moment," I said, and I calmed Station Command. What followed was approximately 3 minutes during which I stood at Gate 7 while she waited, patiently, utterly still, in the way that predators are still, and Station Command's tone shifted from mildly impatient to very focused to, by the end, something close to controlled panic. The voice in my earpiece said, "Sergeant Vance, you are looking at the personal seal of Lady Isaveth Nocthariven, 3rd House of Eveth, Shadow Court emissary to the Galactic Compact. Her clearance level is, it's, just clear her through, Sergeant. Clear her through immediately and then please come to command for a debrief." I closed the comm. She was watching me with those gold eyes. "You are cleared through, Lady Isaveth," she said. "Lady Isaveth. I apologize for the delay." She took her secondary credential back. She looked at me for one more moment, and then she said very quietly, "Do not apologize, Sergeant Vance." It was, and again, that almost imperceptible shift in expression, refreshing. She walked past me. I watched her go, because I was doing my job, not because of anything else. That is what I will tell you, and that is what I will maintain. Dissa appeared at my elbow. "You know that was Isaveth Ven," she said, in the tone people use when they are trying very hard to keep their voice level. "I know now. She's 3rd House, Eli, third house Nocthari they don't get questioned by anyone. There's literally a compact treaty clause about it. I didn't question her, I questioned the scanner. She's going to remember your name. Good, I said, though I had no idea at the time what I meant by that. Command debriefed me for 45 minutes. I filled out an incident report that was technically classified at a level above my clearance, which the duty officer handled by filling it out for me based on my verbal account, while I sat there being mildly humiliated. The consensus was that I had not technically violated protocol. The scanner malfunction was real, and my escalation had been correct, but that the manner in which I had handled the interaction was going to require a formal review. The duty officer, Major Kessler, kept saying the phrase, "She is a very significant person," in the way that people repeat something when they need it to mean more than it seems to mean on the surface. I counted 7 times. I stopped counting after 7. I went back to my post. I finished my shift. I ate dinner in the core mess with Dissa, who spent most of the meal reading on her tablet and occasionally looking at me with an expression that mixed concern and fascination in roughly equal parts. "You're not scared," she said, halfway through her meal. "Of what?" "Of what she might do, of what you might have started." I thought about it. I was surprised to realize she was right. I wasn't scared. I was something but scared, wasn't it? "She said it was refreshing," I said. Dissa put her tablet down. "Eli, she's Nocthari, she's third house." The word refreshing coming from her could mean about 40 different things, and I would say maybe 3 of them are good for you. I think it meant what it sounded like. "You don't know that." I know she didn't call for a floor supervisor. I know she didn't invoke the treaty clause. I know she took the secondary check and stood there and waited. Dissa looked at me for a long moment. "You liked her," she said. "I don't know her." "That's not what I said." I didn't answer, because the honest answer was complicated and I didn't entirely understand it yet, and anyway it was irrelevant, because a third house shadow court emissary and a human sergeant were not. That was just not a thing. That was not a category of thing that existed. I went asleep that night in my bunk in C-Ring and stared at the ceiling for a while, watching the light from the nebula come through the observation port in slow colored pulses, and thought about gold eyes that looked like they contained something ancient, and a voice that made the air in a room feel different. And then I went asleep, because I had a 600 shift. Part 2. When the station holds its breath. 3 days went by. Normal days. Long shifts, paperwork, the usual small dramas of a working station. A minor altercation in Bay 3 between a Drakali freight crew and a Ihorn customs inspector. A sensor malfunction on Ring 4 that turned out to be a nest of what the maintenance team described as something like a very large moth, but worse. A diplomatic reception in the central hub that required extra security rotation and left me on my feet for 12 hours straight. I didn't see her again during those 3 days, which was fine, which was completely expected because the station had 47 docking bays and 6 residential rings, and she had no particular reason to walk past Gate 7 again. I was not looking for her. I want to be clear about that. I was doing my job. On the 4th day, I was doing a solo patrol of Corridor 19, the long commercial walkway on Ring 2 that connected the civilian residential area to the secondary market section, at about 2100 station time, which was well past the main foot traffic hours. Ring 2 at night had its own quality to it. The overhead lighting dimmed to about 40% after 2000, which was standard station policy to encourage circadian regulation, and in that lower light the corridor felt longer than it was, the curved walls picking up the faint glow from shop signs and status displays along the sides. I was maybe 2/3 down the corridor when I heard it. Not a sound you could identify immediately, more of an absence. The kind of absence that happens when you're in a space and something shifts the quality of sound around you, dampens it in a particular way that your body registers before your brain does. I stopped. I didn't draw my weapon. My hand moved near it, but I didn't draw. "Sergeant Vance." The voice came from the alcove to my left, one of the small recessed spaces between shops, usually used for equipment access or ventilation controls. She was standing there, not hiding. Exactly, Nocthari don't hide in the way that implies something furtive. She was simply present in a space where she hadn't been a moment before, and there was nothing to be done about the logic of that except accept it. I turned to face the alcove, Lady Isaveth. She stepped out of the shadow by perhaps half a meter. In the dimmed corridor lighting, the bioluminescence in her hair was more visible, not bright, just a barely there silver thread that moved when she did, like the Paloran Nebula in miniature. "You patrol this corridor," she said. "On rotation, yes." "I know, I checked your schedule." I considered the implications of that statement for a moment. "Can I ask why?" "Because I wanted to speak with you," she said, "and I did not want to do so at your gate, where it would be observed and logged and made into something formal." "Speaking with me here is informal." "More so," she said, and there it was again, that almost not there expression at the corner of her mouth. I had not been wrong about what I'd noticed that first day. There was something happening in her expression, something that by the standards of Nocthari facial dynamics was probably quite expressive, like someone talking with their hands. I just wasn't calibrated well enough to read it yet. I would be later, but not yet. "What did you want to speak about?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at me with those golden eyes, not predatorily, not threateningly, but with the kind of focused attention that is rare enough in any species to feel significant when you encounter it. The kind of attention that says I am actually looking at you, not at the version of you that's convenient for me to see. "I have been emissary to this station for 14 months, she said. "In that time, no one at this station, compact personnel, diplomatic staff, security, has stopped me for any reason. Not once. Because they know who I am and what that means, and they make way." "I know," I said. "And you stopped me." "I know. I want to understand why." "I told you, the scanner." "The scanner was a pretext," she said, not unkindly, just factually. "You could have waved me through. The ambiguous tone on that terminal happens at least once a week. I know this. I have been on stations long enough to know the sounds they make. Any other guard would have waved me through and escalated only if the alarm was clear." I thought about arguing. I thought about explaining the protocol again. But she was watching me with that focused attention, and something about it made me realize that the correct response was not the defensive one. "I didn't wave you through," I said, "because waving you through would have been the wrong call. Not because of who you are. Because the scan was ambiguous and the credential type was one I hadn't seen before. If I wave through something I can't verify and it turns out to be an issue, people could get hurt. That's true regardless of who the credential belongs to." She considered this. Even if the person in front of you has the power to remove you from your post, to remove you from this station, to have your career ended with a message to the appropriate compact authority. "That's not my problem to worry about," I said. "My problem is whether I'm doing my job." She looked at me for a long moment. "Human," she said, just that word, like a category, like she was looking at a thing she thought she understood and finding it was different from the file. "Sergeant Vance," I corrected mildly. "Sergeant Vance," she repeated, and this time there was something in the way she said it that I couldn't quite parse, a quality that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite something warmer than amusement, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. We stood in corridor 19 for another moment in silence that was, somehow, not uncomfortable. "I will not interfere with your career," she said. "I didn't think you would." "No," she said, "you didn't, did you? It wasn't a question." That is also unusual. She stepped back into the alcove, not to hide, just shifting her position back to where she'd been. "Sergeant Vance," she said. "Yes." "Tomorrow evening, there is a function in the Hub Reception Hall, a compact cultural exchange event. Most of your Corps personnel will be on extended rotation. I will be present. The event is open to compact security staff." I waited, because that sounded like an invitation, and I wasn't sure how to respond to what sounded like an invitation from a third house Shadow Court emissary. "I'll check the rotation schedule," I said. That corner of the mouth motion. "Do that," she said. And then she was gone. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in stories where someone vanishes in a swirl of darkness. She simply moved down the alcove, turned, and was no longer visible in the time it took me to blink. Nocthari fast, that kind of fast. I stood in corridor 19 for about 10 more seconds, listening to the hum of the station systems and the distant sound of the market section shutting down for the night. Then I continued my patrol, because I had a job to do. But I did check the rotation schedule when I got back, and I was not, as it happened, on extended rotation the next evening. I did not tell Dessay where I was going. This was not deception. She didn't ask and I didn't volunteer. I simply dressed in the formal version of my Corps uniform, the one with the insignia properly pressed and the collar tabs in the correct position, and I walked to the Hub Reception Hall at 1900 station time and showed my ID at the door and went in. The cultural exchange event was by Hub standards modestly attended. Maybe 200 people, various species, various diplomatic levels, various degrees of enthusiasm about being there. The hall itself was one of Vereker 7 better spaces, high ceilings, soft lighting, and a floor-to-ceiling observation port on the far wall that currently showed the nebula in full evening display, all violet and green and slow-moving gold. There were tables with food and drink, carefully curated to be tolerable to as many different species as possible, which meant that most of it was tolerable to none of them but inoffensive to all. There was a presentation board running a rotating display of cultural artifacts from 17 compact civilizations. There was a live performance happening in the far corner that I think was music, in the sense that it was organized sound, though my human ears were not necessarily the intended audience. I got a drink from the human-compatible section of the food table. I stood near the observation port. I looked at the nebula. I was aware of the moment she entered the room, that temperature thing, that quality of air. I did not turn around immediately. "You came," she said, from behind my left shoulder. "I checked the schedule," I said. She came to stand beside me at the observation port. She was wearing something different tonight, not a uniform but a formal garment in deep charcoal and silver that followed the same color logic as her uniform, but was clearly not one. The bioluminescence in her hair was more visible in the softer light of the reception hall. We stood looking at the nebula for a moment. "You know what that is," she said, not a question, an observation. "The Paloran Nebula, remains of a stellar collapse maybe 80,000 years ago." 93,400 years, she said. "We were there, my people. We watched the star die. From the dark side of Evith, you can see it. Even now, you can see the light from the collapse, because it was close enough and bright enough that the light still hasn't fully faded. Every Nocthari child learns to find it in the sky. We call it the dying witness." I looked at the nebula. I thought about what she had said, that her people had watched that star die, that the light still hadn't fully faded. I thought about 93,000 years. "That's a long memory," I said. "We have long lives," she said. "We keep what we see." I thought about asking how old she was. I didn't, because the briefing had been explicit on that point. Personal age is considered an intimate disclosure among Nocthari, and asking is considered exceptionally forward. But I thought about it. "Your species," she said. "You have been in space for, what is it, 300 years. 312. Commercial spaceflight. 347 if you count the early orbital period. 347, she repeated. The way she said it wasn't contemptuous. It was more like the way you might say 3 days old about something that had nonetheless surprised you by being more robust than its age suggested. And in that time, you have expanded to 47 settled worlds and established military and diplomatic presence in 212 systems. I'd have to look up the exact number. 212, she said. I know the number, I study what interests me. There was something in that last sentence, a quality. I noticed it and filed it carefully. Why do you study humans? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Because you are new, and new things are worth understanding. A pause. Most new species, when they enter the compact, spend the first century being careful, being quiet, learning the rules, making themselves small. Humans don't do that, I said. No, humans do the opposite. You arrive somewhere and immediately begin asking questions and changing things and making noise and getting into situations that by rights should have ended you several times over. And then you simply continue. You are still here, still making noise. Is that a compliment? It is an observation, she said, but that corner of her mouth moved. I smiled. I probably should not have smiled. It's not like my expression was any more readable to her than hers was to me, at that early stage, but it happened naturally and I didn't stop it. You've been watching humans on this station for 14 months, I said. Yes. And none of us surprised you before. She was quiet again. The quality of her quiet was different from human silence. It wasn't uncertain, wasn't awkward. It was considered. Everything she did had that quality of being considered. 1 or 2 small things, she said, but nothing that required, she seemed to pause on the right word, recalibration. And I required recalibration. She looked at me then, directly, full attention, those gold eyes. You stopped me, she said. Not because you were trying to challenge me, not because you didn't know who I was. You stopped me because it was correct to stop me. Because and again, that pause, that considering of words, your obligation to the principle of what you were doing mattered more to you than the social consequence of doing it. That is not something I encounter often, in any species. I thought about that. I thought about it for a moment without trying to dress it up or make it more than it was. I was also sleep-deprived and running on autopilot, I said. She looked at me for a long second, and then, quiet, low, and with a quality I hadn't heard from her yet, she laughed. Not a big laugh. More of a sound, a breath, a thing that happened in her expression and in the slight shift of her posture, but it was real. Sergeant Vance, she said. Eli, I said. She considered that. Eli. The way she said it, the sound of my name in her voice, did something to the air in my chest that I was going to spend a considerable amount of time not thinking about. Isavith, I said, because it seemed right to offer it back. She looked at the nebula again. I looked at the nebula, the dying witness she'd called it, the light from a dead star still traveling, still visible. We stood there for most of the next hour, talking about small things and large things in roughly equal measure, and the reception hall continued around us, and I drank my drink and she drank, I noticed, from the diplomatic staff's table, something in a dark container that was not any kind of food I recognized. And by the time the event began to wind down, I had told her more about myself than I usually told anyone. And I knew more about her than I knew about most people I'd worked with for years. When she left, she paused at the door to the reception hall and looked back at me, just for a moment. The distance was enough that I couldn't read the expression with any precision. But something in my chest said she was looking to see if you were watching. I was watching. Part 3. What happens when the alarm sounds? 6 days after the reception hall, everything changed. I say everything changed, and I mean it in a specific, concrete, station-shaking way, not in the vague emotional sense. Though both things are true. Both things happened at approximately the same time, which is the kind of coincidence that the universe seems to enjoy. It was 3:40 station time. I was not on shift. I was asleep, or trying to be, in my bunk in C-Ring. The nebula outside was particularly active that night, ribbons of green light moving faster than usual, the station's electromagnetic interference running at about 80% of its maximum. The alarm was not the general emergency alarm. It was the priority security alarm, the one that sounds specifically in core personnel quarters and means get up, get dressed, get to your station, and do not ask questions until you're there. I was in uniform and moving in under 3 minutes, old habit. The corridors in C-Ring had that specific energy of middle-of-the-night emergency, people moving fast, talking quietly, the lighting still in its dimmed nighttime configuration, so everything had this blue-gray cast that made every face look slightly wrong. I got to Gate 7, my designated station for priority alerts, and found Dessa already there, fully kitted, her expression locked into professional neutral. "What is it?" I asked. "Bay 11, she said. Drakali warship that docked yesterday. There's an incident." "What kind of incident?" "The complicated kind." The next 20 minutes were a masterclass in the way information flows during a crisis, which is to say, in patches, with gaps and occasionally backwards. What I pieced together over those 20 minutes, through calm traffic and a terse update from Major Kessler on the channel, was this. The Drakali warship in Bay 11 had arrived on what the manifest described as a routine resupply stop. But Drakali warships do not typically make routine resupply stops at diplomatic stations. They have their own supply infrastructure. The ship had been flagged for additional inspection when it docked, but the inspection had been delayed due to the electromagnetic interference playing havoc with the scanning equipment. Overnight, something had gone wrong. 3 members of the Compact's customs inspection team had been detained aboard the Drakali ship, not arrested, exactly, but not free to leave either. The Drakali captain was, according to the comm traffic, asserting contested jurisdiction over the inspection process, which in Drakali diplomatic language meant I don't recognize your authority to be here, and I'm making that point through the medium of holding your people. This was a serious, but not unprecedented situation. It was the kind of thing that got resolved through 3 or 4 hours of extremely careful diplomatic messaging, and the strategic deployment of compact authority, and everybody being very careful not to back anybody into a corner. Except the Drakali captain had apparently had a look at the passenger manifest for the station and had made a specific demand. Not for the inspection to stop, not for the customs team to be released in exchange for leaving without further inspection. No. The Drakali captain wanted a meeting, a formal one, with a specific individual. The individual was Isaveth Ven. I found this out at the same time as everything else, through a calm update from command. The reasoning, as best as could be reconstructed, was that the Drakali captain knew the political weight of the Third House Nokthari seal, and believed that a Nokthari emissary could serve as a neutral party to mediate whatever the actual situation was on that ship, or, more cynically, that having a Nokthari emissary present would constrain Compact's response options and buy time for whatever the Drakali were actually trying to do. The problem was that the situation in Bay 11 was uncontained. 3 Compact inspectors were detained aboard a warship. The Drakali crew had not been cooperative about allowing communication. The electromagnetic interference was making the station's close-range sensors unreliable. And command had already sent a message to Lady Isaveth through official channels. Her response had come back within minutes. "I will go." I heard this on the comm channel. I stood at Gate 7 and heard it. and I felt something tighten in my chest that had nothing to do with the security situation. I keyed my comm, Vance to command. A pause. Go ahead, Sergeant. If Lady Isaveth is going to Bay 11, she needs an escort through the secure corridors. Another pause. Longer. That's correct, Sergeant. I'll do it. The pause this time lasted long enough that I thought the comm had cut out. Sergeant Vance, given recent events, do you think that's... I know the corridors to Bay 11, I said. I know the security setup, and she's already met me. It reduces variables. Which was a very rational-sounding reason and was not the whole reason, and I knew it. But it was also genuinely true, which meant it was the right call even accounting for the other reasons. Approved, said Command. Move to the emissary suite on Ring 1 and escort her through. The Ring 1 emissary suite was a different world from the core quarters. High ceilings, adjustable lighting, the kind of materials on the walls that cost what my annual salary cost. The corridor leading to it was very quiet. She was already in the corridor when I arrived. She was in her uniform, the formal version, the charcoal and silver, and she had her secondary credential at her collar, and she was, I noted, completely calm. Not the calm of someone managing fear. The calm of someone who simply wasn't afraid. She saw me, and there was the briefest pause. Sergeant Vance, she said. Eli, I said, is all right in a situation like this. She assessed me for a fraction of a second. You volunteered. I know the corridors. Yes, she said, in a tone that accepted this without necessarily believing it was the only reason.